This is Virtual Environmental Education, Factory Farming, Lesson 4. I'm Anna. I'm the co-president of Sustainability Club.
I'm Stella. I'm the treasurer of Sustainability Club.
I'm Emily. I'm an environmental volunteer.
So, what is factory farming? It's basically a system of rearing livestock using intensive methods by which poultry, pigs, or cattle are confined indoors under strictly controlled environments and conditions. Let's find out more about this.
What is factory farming? Factory farming is similar to an industrial factory in the way that the animals are raised at a high density in small spaces to maximize yield, and animals are bred and taken care of for the sole purpose of being used for their meat, and these operations are known as CAFOs, or confined animal feeding operations. And in this picture, you can see an example of a CAFO, and a type of animal that farmers raise for their meat are chickens. And there's a large space in CAFOs, but then people pack a whole bunch of animals in there to make the most profit that they can. And you can see that the chickens don't have a lot of space to walk around in.
History of factory farming. So, large-scale farming animals began in the 1920s with chicken. In the 1970s, pig farmers as well as cow farmers began using mass production for their farming processes. And today, 94% of animals that we eat are raised in CAFOs, the concentrated, confined areas of feeding operations that Emily described. Animals on factory farms are not protected by federal legislation, and this allows for farmers to get away with a lot of things, such as injecting them with hormones or antibiotics so that they can grow at a really fast rate and prevent their deaths from young. And factory farming began as a way for farmers to manage their farms at an extremely fast rate because organic and free range requires a lot more commitment and a lot more of expenses. It's just a lot more efficient for farmers to concentrate all of their animals together so that they can feed them together, they can inject them with hormones and antibiotics together. It's just a lot easier and it requires a lot less time. And in this picture, this is an early factory of a feeding operation in a factory farm. And basically, there's a bunch of chickens and they're all super close together, as you can see, and the eggs are laying at a extremely fast rate.
So, more about the chickens. So, chickens in factory farms are selectively bred to be extremely large so that the meat yield is maximized as much as possible. And most of these warehouses are windowless, and they can have up to 20,000 chickens in one building. And many died due to health impacts, but they are generally ready to be killed at 6 to 7 weeks old. And some of the health impacts are that they are so close together that they can't walk, and this causes problems with their feet. And also, lights in the factories are on all night, so many have problems with vision, and some even go blind. And it's also just a very bad quality of life for them. And they diseases spread very quickly because so many animals are close together. So this makes them more prone to get a disease.
Another type of animal that farmers raise for their meat are pigs, and there are about 5.8 million pigs used for breeding in the US that are impregnated at 7 months and used continuously for birthing piglets. And the piglets are taken from their mothers at 17 to 20 days old and then confined to pens for about 6 months until they reach the market weight. And the market weight is the weight that pigs must reach to be able to be sold at the market. And pigs are given a lot of hormones, so they grow to their full size at around 6 months. But a regular pig takes a lot longer to grow to their full size.
So another type of factory farming is cattle. So in the United States, about 41 million cows are killed each year for beef. They generally spend 1 year on rangeland and then are shipped out to CAFOs. And basically, they'll go to a grazing land and they'll spend the first year of their life just eating grass and going, and then they're shipped out to the large confined spaces where they don't have that ability to move around anymore. They're injected with a lot of antibiotics and hormones to ensure that they reach a market weight before dying, before they're killed for their meat. And a fun fact is, in the European Union, they banned American meat because it has hormones in it, and they don't let people. It's illegal to eat hormone injected meat in Europe. Cows are also used. Cows that are used for milk are forced to give birth every year for 3 to 4 years, and after 3 to 4 years, they grow really weak, and then they're killed. And it takes 2,500 gallons of water, a gallon of gasoline, and 35 pounds of destroyed topsoil to raise 1 pound of steak. And that's a lot considering that each of the cows are at least like 300 pounds. And also, water is not an unlimited resource, so if we're wasting this much water, pretty soon we're not gonna have any more left.
So aquaculture is basically the same thing, but it's just in water. So it's where half of the seafood around the world comes from, and they raise fish. So just like CAFOs on land, fish are raised in confined areas and given plenty of antibiotics, hormones, and pesticides. And as you can see in the picture, they're basically big pens, but there's a lot of fish in them. And they're mostly outside and in ponds, rivers, lakes, and oceans. And this is what farmers have to do to keep up with the demand for seafood. So they also raise them in very high densities.
Some environmental effects of factory farming are the excess use of contaminate water resources, and the hormones, antibiotics, and pesticides that are used in fish farming contaminates ocean water. And the farmed fish can also escape their confinements and act as an invasive species to wild fish, as well as spread their own diseases along. And animals raised under confined operations are much more susceptible to disease than regular animals because they can spread it much faster as they are so much closer together.
Environmental effects of factory farming continued. Factory farms generate more than 1 million tons of manure per day, and that's a lot considering 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. Animal waste is stored in anaerobic lagoons, which can cause leaks, further detrimenting the environment. So basically, if you guys have ever been on a plane before over Illinois, you might see a huge like pink pool, and that's an anaerobic lagoon. And basically, in anaerobic lagoons, the manure and animal waste and a lot of pesticides and chemicals are dumped there. And if they leak, so if there's like a lot of rain, the substances inside can leak into nearby reservoirs, and if it contaminates that environment, that can cause an entire ecosystem to die because the animals in that ecosystem, they aren't used to the chemicals and that they can kill them. Cattle releases methane, which is a greenhouse gas 28 times more potent than CO2. So like we talked about earlier in previous lessons, CO2 is the number one cause of global warming because it's a greenhouse gas, it traps heat, and if methane is 28 times more potent than CO2, it has a much more drastic effect on global warming, on accelerating it. Livestock pastures lead to deforestation because a lot of land is required for grazing. And like last lesson, we talked about deforestation. There's only so much land on Earth, and we're already using it at an extremely fast rate. So we're not going to have that much land left in the future, and that's going to be a serious dilemma for us to solve in order to continue factory farming at the same rate. It's just impossible. Factory farms are also responsible for many algal blooms because ammonia is an animal waste and it is often dumped into water. And algal blooms are basically caused by ammonia. If you guys have ever seen Lake Erie, It's part of it is covered in an algal bloom, and it's this huge green substance. It blocks all light from reaching the surface, so animals will die because they can't eat the plants. The plants require sunlight, and photosynthesis cannot happen without light. And also, it causes suffocation of many animals.
So environmental effects of factory farming continued. So globally, agriculture and forestry are responsible for 24% of greenhouse gas emissions, and then agriculture uses 71% of freshwater use. So whereas industry only uses 20% and domestic drinking water and sanitation only uses 9% of water. So as you can tell, we use almost one-fourth of the world's greenhouse, or one-fourth of the world's greenhouse gases are emitted, and also almost three-fourths of the fresh water is used for this. And we need to find alternatives because resources are being wasted, like fresh water, and also we need to slow down climate change. So we need to find new alternatives to factory farming.
The impact of factory farming on human health. Animals in the operations are injected with lots of antibiotics and steroids, and recent research has implied that the antibiotics in CAFO-raised meat have made bacteria in humans resistant to more diseases. And factory farmed animals have more contaminants, including pesticides, hormones, chemicals, and antibiotics that are organically raised in cage-free animals. And animal products are the primary source of saturated fat in the American diet. And saturated fat is also linked to heart disease and obesity. And the food supply is often contaminated due to poor management of animal waste, leading to bacterial diseases.
Factory farming and climate change. Climate change will make farming much more difficult because higher temperatures will cause more water stress. Water is already a super used resource, and we don't have enough of it as it is. We can only use fresh water for farming, and if we're using all of our resources, our water resources, in the future, we're not going to have any water left for planting. And not only can we not do factory farming, but any type of farming is going to be impossible. We're losing more and more land every year due to deforestation grazing, and eventually there's not going to be any more left, which will make grazing impossible and also take away our natural resources found in forests, and will kill off a lot of species that live in those forests. Besides CO2 and methane emissions from farms, factory farming also requires a lot of transportation, which releases even more CO2 into the atmosphere. So a lot of us, we get our fruits from California just because the environment there is a really great fruit growing environment. And we live in Illinois, so if we're shipping from California to Illinois, that's a really long distance, and each mile requires a lot of CO2 from gas to be emitted, and that CO2 traps heat in the atmosphere, and that accelerates global warming.
So responses to factory farming, there's really only one way to prevent environmental effects of factory farming, which is just to decrease the amount of meat we eat, which a large majority of the population is trying to do that, but or some aren't, but then also we either would have to all go vegan. Even with developments such as aquaponics, making crop agriculture more efficient, factory farming would still have a great impact on straining the planet's resources. And then many factories like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat have developed meats that taste like meat, but it's alternative, so you're not actually eating meat. So this helps decrease the amount of meat everyone eats.
The importance of factory farming to sustainability. Many of the planet's natural resources are expected to be fully depleted by the time the human population reaches 8 billion people. And right now, we're currently at 7.8 billion, but it's expected to reach 9 in 40 years. This means we have to take immediate action now to prevent our planet from being stripped of resources because our species may go extinct, as well as causing half the species on Earth to go extinct by 2050.